And here we are again, strangers. If you missed last week's, it was my very first collab, and I'm awfully proud of it. So much so that I wanted to continue on the same theme with this week's story. Story 110. Back in my clowning days, I had the opportunity to work with one of those traveling carnivals. You know the ones. Show up randomly, stick around for a weekend maybe, and then disappear just as fast. It was one of those weekends that I was shadowing their fortune teller, a girl called Emily. She took me through some of it, the things that you do to basically cold read people. But she told me that when you give people the bad news, you gotta sandwich it between two pieces of good news to make it palatable. And when I told her I didn't understand why we'd give them bad news at all, paying customers want to hear good news only, she shrugged in a really heavy way, like she was wearing a backpack full of dumbbells. And that's when she told me it wasn't just cold reading. It was something else, something that had been dogging her for a long time. And that's when she told me her story. And it goes like this. I'm from around here, you know. Lived in the Midwest a long time before I joined up with this lot. I even enlisted and worked at the base right down the road for both of my hitches. You never get off it, they say. And they're right. You spend a lot of time with a wide group of people from all over, though. And maybe it gives you a sort of analysis on what's similar between people, despite coming from completely different places and circumstance. Like this one time, there was this guy from Minnesota and another guy from Puerto Rico. Those two couldn't have been more different in the way they came up. Rich, poor, Catholic, atheist, soccer, hiking, older and young enough to have needed his parents' say-so to join up. But I went out twice with a group to the bars, once with the Minnesotan, once with the Puerto Rican, and by the end of that second night, I knew those two would eventually be best friends. The way they acted, treated others, what they drank and how much. It was like watching two adaptations of the same movie, seeing the same character saying the same lines, played by different actors. They hadn't even met each other yet, but I just knew. I got curious enough to make sure both of them came out on the next pub crawl, and by the end of the night, they were doing karaoke, arms around each other's shoulders. They deployed together, lived together as roommates, got out, and to the best of my knowledge, even own a moving company together now. And I knew it would be that way, just by instinct. It sort of freaked me out at first, how accurate I'd figure things like that. But after a while, I realized I couldn't turn it off. And sometimes I wanted to, because it wasn't always a happy ending. Another time, we had this office we worked in when we weren't deployed or at training or appointments. It was a nice building, but the furniture looked as if it had fallen piece by piece off a series of different trucks. Nothing really fit together, and there was this one computer bank with a big cabinet over the top of it, held up on one side by a big metal bookcase. It had been that way for years. But one day I came in. I went to go use one of those computers, and I stopped, froze in my tracks. It was like the sound of the room got quiet, or blocked out by, static. I just had this feeling that, I don't know, today was the day. I decided I'd head over to the scheduling desk instead. They always needed help filing all the training rosters, accounting for who'd been at Field X. It wasn't my job, but like I said, something just told me not to be in that office. The cabinet didn't fall first. The bookcase did. Out of nowhere, too. Once it fell, the whole thing came down, ripped some of the drywall with it.
and it all tumbled down right on the head of a girl who'd been sitting there doing a training. When they dug her out, she had blood coming out of her ears. She got a concussion from that, a medical waiver, and then after that, I never saw her again. Another time, it was dramping. Drunk camping, they called it dramping. A group of us went out to the woods with tents, radios, and, of course, coolers of whatever the Class 6 had on special. But on the drive there, I got that quiet feeling again. Static, like the world was on one frequency, but someone had bumped the knob and moved it just a hair to the left, making it quiet, muffled, crackly. I saw wide eyes in flame. I didn't know what that was about, nor did I know how to go about telling people, hey, maybe this is a bad idea, this harmless thing we've all done many times before. So I said nothing. I just kept driving. Got there, and when the coolers were popped open, I just decided not to drink. Not that time. And that night, I couldn't sleep. I just felt restless. I kept getting up. There was something bugging me. I'd watched them pour out the bonfire, scooping the live coals into a big metal bucket to segregate them from anything that could burn. But that feeling was just dogging me. I finally decided it was one of those nights you just won't get to sleep. I got up, thinking I'd walk around our campsite, maybe over to the communal bathrooms. When I stepped out of my tent, though, I was hit with two things. One, that it was dead silent. Everyone else, every single other person who'd been up, lively and drunk only half an hour before, was dead asleep. The second, the smell of burning plastic. I saw it immediately because it was the only light there was that night. The metal bucket they'd scooped all the coals into to stop the fire from burning on. Well, someone had stored it right up against one of the tents, and the still live coals, the hottest part of the fire, were heating up the bucket like a stove. The side of the bucket that was up against the tent had first melted its plastic, but was now blackening, bubbling, and spreading with flames. I screamed out, knocking around in the dark, trying to find something to dump on it, put it out. Some of the others woke up and came scrambling out to see what was happening. One guy grabbed one of the coolers. The ice we'd brought was melted, and when he dumped it, there was this big hiss. The people in the tent that had been on fire never woke up. They were completely passed out, dead drunk. If I hadn't had that instinct, if I had joined them that night and had a few myself, well, it would explain why my vision had been wide eyes and flame. I told a few friends, just a few, enough to see them sort of look at me funny. Then I stopped. I decided to just ignore it. Maybe it was all just statistical probability. I knew the shelf was poorly constructed, and one day it fell. And a bunch of drunken airmen in the woods with fire. Not a leap to determine that one of them is going to feature heavily in the next safety briefing. That was what I told myself. And when I'd get those little feelings, I'd just bury them, keep them quiet, and ignore the outcome. It worked out until the last bar crawl. We were all out, having a good time, except for Lily. Lily was one half of a couple with Calvin, the guy. They both worked in our squadron and were always together for years at that point. And sure, like most couples, they'd had their ups and downs. But I'd started getting a sort of weird feeling. At first I thought it was about the two of them, but then I realized the more and more it was really just about Calvin. Something started to feel kinda off. So when that night, the bar crawl night, Lily and Calvin got into a fight right there. It started sending up red flags in my gut. They both went outside and across the street, so even us smokers couldn't hear it. But even from a distance, it looked rough. Her hands were up, down, gesturing. She talked with her hands all the time, but when I watched them that night, they looked like birds in bad wind. And Calvin, by comparison, was just solid, unmoving. His head was turned down at her, but he didn't react. It was like he was looking through her. No expression on his face. Even with us across the street, I swear I didn't even see him blink. That bad feeling rose and rose. The other smokers with me said it looked like maybe she'd had a bit too much to drink. Maybe something had rubbed her the wrong way, and he was just letting her let it all out. That's what we decided amongst ourselves, the three of us clustered together with our coats flapping like ravens on a wire. But Lily finally threw up her hands and began to walk away, and that's when Calvin moved. He only took a step, but I saw more. I saw his hands come out of his peacoat and towards her, to grab her, specifically level with her neck. The static flooded my ears. I blinked, and I could see Lily's face as though she was standing right in front of me. Her mouth and eyes were open in this surprised O shape. The blast of static drowned out everything, and like he could hear it, Calvin's head suddenly whipped over, and he locked eyes with us smokers. Immediately, he looked away and just walked after Lily. She was already storming off, and he hustled to catch up. I didn't hear words or like voices. It was only ever static. But just like that, I knew something was going to happen again. Not what, but this ache, this muscle that I just wanted to stretch or rub or just poke until I could figure out what felt so bad, what was wrong. I tried to tell my friends we should go after them, but they all played it off. Someone said she'd had too much to drink. It was Lily and Calvin, and if we made a big deal of it, she'd be hella embarrassed the next week in the office. I had texted Lily, but she hadn't texted back. I hadn't driven that night, but neither Calvin nor Lily had, so I hoped that they'd reappear at some point, and that awful feeling I had would quit, hoping maybe the awful feeling was the fight. But of course, Calvin and Lily did not reappear. I tried to get information out of all of my friends, but they were drunk, distracted. It took me about half the drive home with them before somebody finally mentioned an after party and said they thought Calvin and Lily had cabbed it there. I wanted to believe them, that they'd ironed it out, gone on to another party, but Lily still hadn't texted me back. I tried to get my friends to rally to follow them to the party. I just needed to see it with my own eyes to make this stinking, sticky feeling roll off of me. But nothing I said would get through. My other friends were done. They all just wanted to go home and sleep it off. I finally decided I'd wake up and text her first thing in the morning. What else could I do? Well, she didn't text me back. She didn't text anyone. Calvin did. That much I got out of someone. He said they'd fought about the house party because he didn't want to go and she did. They'd taken separate cabs. He'd gone home, and Lily had gone on to the party. And that was the story. But then, Lily didn't report to work the following week. And when somebody went by her house, she wasn't there. All the while, that bad feeling rose and rose. It filled my gut up so full I couldn't eat. And finally, that Thursday, a full 4 days after she had gone missing, a realtor happened to schedule an open house. And that open house was on the same street as the house party we'd all heard about. Imagine his surprise when he found her in the garage, strangled. Her eyes and mouth frozen in wide surprise, like an O. Emily fell silent for a while after telling me that, before adding this. Like I said, you play the averages. Young girls giggling over boys, young boys giggling over girls, older girls trying to look cool and indifferent, deep down terrified about college or careers. You watch for what makes them smile, what makes them frown. But sometimes you get someone that gives you that blast of static. A picture, maybe, or a smell like melting plastic. The sound of a car crash, the wide eyes and mouth of a face. And you can't keep it to yourself because you might be the only warning they get. So you just tuck it into the middle, like giving your dog medicine and peanut butter, hoping it gets in there without them even noticing, and hoping that it stops whatever it was. Because you can't just not say something when you see it, right? She stopped and asked me if they still taught us in training. And they do. If you see something, you say something. For those 10 days, I worked with Emily in that tent. I like to think I picked up enough to be passably good at telling fortunes. But if you're wondering if I personally got any visions, well, the answer is no. Her stories made me aware of them, like knowing there's another radio station available, and if you spent enough time rolling the dial knob, you might pick it up. But I never tried to tune in myself. It occurred to me that Emily wasn't as old as I thought. Her face wasn't unlined because of Botox, but actual youth. It was the white shot through her hair that was deceptive. Her hair had gone prematurely gray from the stress, straining to hear that distant radio station, and the weight of what to do with what she heard.
Well, friends, be it the stars, be it signs, or be it suggestion and placebo, sometimes you just get a feeling, and that feeling bears out to be right. As with luck, fortune comes in both good and bad flavors. And all I can do is hope each and every one of you are experiencing only the good kind, the blue flavor like a slushie. If you'd like to get in touch or share a story from your past, email and socials are on the screen and in the description. Liking, commenting, and or sharing this video feeds some sort of algorithm monster that lives under YouTube's bed. So they say. And otherwise, I'll see you again soon. Stay strange, stay safe, and take care, strangers.